Children come home from school, it's in front of the television set. When mom gets in from half day of work, it's in front of the television set. When dad gets home from work, it's in front of the television set. And they're not in there talking with one another. They're glued like zombies to that set. No talking, no discussion. Or maybe the mother hates it. When father gets home, he's glued there. No interaction. Communication breaks down. No family time. What? Divorce. Inventors of the evil things, divorce. Results from things like that. I hate the television set with a passion. It should be outlawed. It's an antichrist box. It's destroying America. There's no justification. There's not a shred, not an evidence in anyone's vocabulary who will think for inviting the television set into someone's home. I don't care whether it's news or what reason. There's no cause for a television set. But again, modern technology has given it to us. And what does it do? It's a carnal enjoyment. Doesn't require any thinking. The less thinking, the better. Then you won't criticize all the shows like I used to do whenever I would watch it. Well, that's false look. And you saw the person's heart beating, whenever they were shot dead, and you looked very closely. I'd look for things like that, because my grandfather taught me to criticize those things. He said, that's a lot of false stuff on there. There'd be someone wasted with a Magnum handgun, and pump, 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 there's his heart if you look real closely on the set. But, most people don't think. The less thinking, the better. Just get into it and get absorbed. It kills your creativity. It kills family time. There is your leisure time, which is wasted. It kills your leisure time because it's spent all in front of the television set. Well, inventors of evil things. So I think Chesterton was right. Nothing fails like success. Nothing fails like success. How true that has been in the modern world. Men as unimaginably diverse as these that I shall mention have decried the rapid rate of industrialization, urbanization, modernization, and technological wizardry. Now, just because I mentioned their names are all heavyweights doesn't necessarily mean anything to you. All I'm trying to point out is what I first said, men as unimaginably diverse as these men. Some Christian, some not. Some this, some the other. Have, with one voice, decried the rapid rate of the growth of modern technological wizardry. Henry Adams, you go back to their writings, and C.S. Lewis, Saul Bellow, the greatest living American novelist, winner of 3 National Book Awards, Jewish writer, Saul Bellow and George Orwell. Reinhold Niebuhr, the famous American theologian, and Jacques Ellul, who I'll mention more about later. Aldous Huxley, we'll mention later, author of the book A Brave New World, and Richard Foster, the modern-day Quaker writer. Now, I don't know what you know about all of those men, but if you know at least half of the names, you notice that's quite a mixed bag there that you threw together. Those weren't like all fundamentalists or all charismatics or all liberals. Henry Adams and C.S. Lewis, Saul Bellow and George Orwell, Jacques Ellul and Reinhold Niebuhr, Aldous Huxley and Richard Foster. You read their writings and they've all decried the rapid rate, the growth of modern technology. Now, the severe problems of technology, we're still under this second attitude here. The severe problems of technology can be divided up into 2 groups. I'm going to finish this, hopefully this morning, and we will stop then. The severe problems of technology. This would be according to the anti-technology people. I don't want to keep saying the anti-technology people. I mean according to me as well, but sometimes I might not have an attitude that other anti-technology people would maintain. But I think the problems of, you say, well, technology, you've been talking a long time about why it's so bad. What's wrong with it? All right, that's what we're going to go into. What are the problems of modern technology? I think they can be divided up into 2 categories. And if you study sociological books on modern technology, I think that this will probably be substantiated, although this is my own. The ecological, environmental concerns, hyphen nature issues. Nature issues. Can you imagine what all the rabbits and bears and deer think today? My, I'd hate to have to be one today. You're either dodging a machine gun some hunter has aimed at you, or you're watching out for that big old truck roaring down the road, or you're afraid to eat that bite of whatever. It's going to have some pesticide in it. The olden days, no problem at all. I think someone could write a good fantasy novel about the attitude of the animal to modern technology today. Who volunteers for that? Who is our writer here to be published first? You know, you could write a good book on that. Personify a raccoon or a deer or something and put all of these thoughts into the mind of that animal. And Walt Disney, I'm sure, would hire you. The ecological, environmental concerns, such things as the exhaustion of natural resources, then I'd put in parentheses, however, if that is possible. There's a very interesting book out. I'm sure we'll get to this whenever we get to ecological, environmental concerns in Christian ethics. But there's a book out. I have it. What's the title of it? The Ultimate Resource, which argues very clearly and strongly that it's nothing but a media hype and lie that we are exhausting the globe's natural resources. I mean, that's all you ever hear, that we're running out of things. And this book has quite a thorough documentation of the fact that we are nowhere near exhausting 1/1,000,000th of the Earth's natural resources. It's interesting when you hear nothing but the opposite from the media, that we're running out of everything. I've got that book called The Ultimate Resource, and I've got another one as well, dealing with the same thing. That in no sense of the word, that's nothing but media hype and media scare to sell newspapers and to get you to watch television. So I just say, if that were possible, exhaustion of natural resources. I think that some resource, let's change the word, exhaustion. We are really encroaching on some of the resources of the globe, maybe encroaching in an invalid, unnecessary manner. Air and water pollution, no question about that. This is one area of severe problems generated by technology. Air and water pollution. Some people are afraid to drink almost any water today. And that is really a modern thing. That's a second half of the 70s, 1970s and 80s issue there, really, of the water and the acid rain and all of this business. They tell us that all of the industrial firms in the Midwest, because of the prevailing winds, it blows everything to New England, and that's what is poisoning the lakes and things around here, and I don't doubt that there's some truth to that. But in our earlier days, when we went camping everywhere. We were a big camping family. We just drank water everywhere. Maybe I drank a little bit too much from different places. I just dip into pools. It didn't have to be a spring for me. I just drink it. I never thought anything about it. And then I've gotten around people since then that are hyper about that. Well, did you put your little pill in the water? Is the water okay? Think okay? What do you mean? Water came out of the ground. Somehow it came out, or it came from heaven, one or the other. It's bound to be okay. God made it from heaven or from out of the ground. People are hyper about that. They want to see it come out of a faucet. They know this is man-made water here, or at least man-purified water. They almost have the attitude that it's man-made, though this is created by us. This is the product of modern technology. Man can't make water. He's going to only take the water out there that maybe he himself has done what? Poison to purify it again. You're the one that poisoned it in the first place. If you would have cut out all the modern technology, you wouldn't have to purify your water then. Oh, I know about the old business of the shots you're supposed to get, but again, the Christian is delivered from that if no one else is. I drink water everywhere. It doesn't make me any difference. The other day I was so thirsty I had filled up a bucket of water. It was just filled with mud and slime. I mean, generally you try to let it sit there long enough to let all of it settle. I was too thirsty to wait. What are you looking at me with cross-eyed for? I just dipped into it and drank it. It's dirt. Dirt's not going to hurt you. A little bit of dirt mixed in. My, when I was a boy, I ate the stuff. So did you. Now I don't eat it. I just drink it. I'm getting better. No, when you're thirsty, I'm not picky. I don't have to have a glass and make sure a pill is in it or make sure it came out of a faucet. Just if I'm thirsty, I'm going to drink. Normally I wouldn't drink muddy, dirty water, though, to be sure. I was thirsty, and I didn't have any other choice. And I just happily drank it. It was good. As it went down, you felt some gritty things in your mouth. I mean, that's like eating, vegetables. You feel some things go down, too. Why is it that we have to have a smooth feeling with water? Let it have some grit in it. Praise God. Grit helps purify things. Grit's a filter, after all. Sand is good. Gravel is good. It's a filter. Wildlife habitat encroachment. I'm just listing some things that the people of ecology would want to talk about. That was a big thing back in the 70s and late 60s. Wildlife habitat encroachment. We're going to have more to say about these things later in ethics, but the Bible does speak on these matters. Remember the case in the Old Testament where if you came across a mother and her young in a nest, a bird, you could take the young but not take the mother? There are so many fair laws in the law of Moses that when you get into and say, now, all right, how does this translate for today? It means what it says, but then more so, how does it translate for today? You come up with some very interesting notions and some very interesting things regarding the human beings, the Christians, let's say, the Christian's relationship to the animal kingdom, the Christian's relationship to the environment out there. It is wrong to pollute and to destroy the environment. And as best as possible, we should not ever contribute to that. It is wrong to be cruel to the animals. To eat game is fair and biblical. A demon gets in some people, Paul said, and forbids them to eat any meat. That's biblical, though, to eat meat. But I know whenever I was young, I talked about my trap line. Well, see, that was when I was not a Christian. And I had some of the sane traps that were always manufactured by the Have-A-Heart people. Nice name, Have-A-Heart traps. But I also use the old-fashioned ones because those are the quickest, easiest ones to use, and those are very cruel, which I wouldn't do today. I have a collection of those still with me hanging in my study, but they just hang there to look at. I don't use them anymore. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it or ask your husband afterwards. He'll probably know. So we're going to save a lot of this issue right here for later. We're looking at the mental side of the whole issue. We're not looking at environment, ecology, air and water pollution, natural resources, wildlife, animal. We will look at that in ethics. That is properly a subject of Christian ethics, but not for where we are now. I'll just say this, that Rachel Carson's book entitled Silent Spring had a tremendous impact on the 1950s and 60s. Some of you may remember that book. Rachel Carson's book. It's not in print as far as I know, but you could find a copy or you could, I'm sure, find it at the library. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, had a tremendous impact on the 1950s and 60s as she unmasked the dangers of indiscriminate, widespread use of DDT. Now there again, DDT was a product of modern technology that eventually was banned because of its harmful side effects. Then I would be tempted to ask, well, how many other things created by modern technology have harmful side effects? Probably everything. Man cannot produce anything that's perfect or that's infinite. Man cannot produce anything really any better than himself, which will be sinful and corrupt. Then the second area of severe problems would be the personal, spiritual, moral concerns. And here's where I will end this morning. The man and God issues. Okay, if you've been taking good notes, you should have a more or less an outline on your page now, and you can look at that and see what I'm talking about. We gave you two attitudes. Under the second attitude, which is the anti-technology attitude, we've mentioned two areas of severe problems. The first one we can simply call the nature issues. Okay, that's one issue by itself for another area of ethics. Secondly, the spiritual issues, the man and God issues, the personal, spiritual, and moral concerns. And I'd list such things as the following under this. Obviously, secularization, that's a man and God issue, but it's a product of modern technology, and it's a severe problem. Secularization, secularism, which it produces. Some other things, depersonalization. You won't hear a lot of teaching on these things in your typical church. It's just over their third grade ability, I think. Anonymity. Now, those are two very important things. Depersonalization. God never intended the globe, the modern West, to operate it as it is doing right now. Everyone is depersonalized. You've heard the business of people being treated as numbers. Well, that's so true. That is so true. Everyone is a number. And it just wearies my bones to have to go in and people ask you, what's your number? What's this? What's that? Instead of saying, oh, Joe! Oh, down at the farm. Good to see you, Joe. It's not that at all anymore. It's all your numbers, all your papers that you have. Depersonalization. Along with that, anonymity. Everybody's what? Everybody's a nobody today. Everybody's a nobody. We're told that modern technology is for you. We're doing it for you. But what does modern technology do? It turns you into a no one, though. That's the irony of it all. It says that these things are all for personal use, for personal freedom, for personal leisure, for personal indulgence. But you don't have your personhood anymore, though. That's been stripped from you, taken from you by modern technology. The danger and fatalities at work because of modern machinery. And in the automobile. I think more people have died from automobile accidents than people died that fell out of a horse and buggy. And automobiles cost a lot more, if my checking around at some recent prices for a truck have indicated. And you can't touch anything for all your life savings, you know. And all you want is just something that'll go up the hill. And they're wanting to say, will you mortgage your life? You know, you got a home to turn in for this? Just an automobile. And that's a very modern phenomenon. That's like the last 10 years. Automobile prices have just gone right through the ceiling. Where you can get a new car, $4,000 and $5,000, and you can't get a really good used car for $4,000 and $5,000. Not a big full-size car, not a good one. No, you can't either. Not for $4,000 and $5,000. Not unless something's wrong, or it's old, or it's got this, or it's something else is different on it. That's just a shame that we're coming to that. And see, everyone now is being forced. No one can pay cash for things like that. Everyone's being forced now to borrow. Not that a lot of people mind, by the way, but you're being forced now to borrow for not only your home, but now your automobiles. Earlier days, you could come up with $1,000 and buy a very decent used car. I'm not saying that you can't today, but it's the exception. It's not like it was in earlier times. You could come up with $1,000 and you could find a very, very decent used car. It's not the same anymore. People could come up with $1,000 earlier, not $5,000 and $6,000 and $7,000, just cash outright to buy your second vehicle. You already own another one. It's your second vehicle. And if you bought your first one new, what was that? That was about $13,000 for a full-size, brand-new, nice car. $13,000. My parents paid less than that for their first home. 4 bedrooms. This was in the suburbs, not in the hills somewhere. This was suburbia. They paid less than that for a 4-bedroom, nice home, a beautiful lot, a beautiful neighborhood, less than what you pay for a full-size car. And that wasn't that many years ago. And you go back earlier than that, and you could probably buy a farm or two for what you can pay for one automobile today. Anyway, danger and fatalities at work and in the automobile, mental illness. Jung said that the great psychosis of the age is loneliness, emptiness, meaninglessness. And the mental caseworkers tell us that rapidity of social change equals an increase in cases of mental illness. That's their own established fact. That as social change happens rapidly, we have a rise in incidence of mental illness. You explain it to me. I mean, I think it's obvious. People can't handle, they cannot cope with how fast life is changing in the modern West. And you see, if you're sitting out there this morning thinking, my life hasn't changed maybe that rapidly, maybe it's because you're a Christian and you're doing things differently and you're thinking differently. Other people in the world are just looking for the newest thing to buy the quickest. I got to have it before everyone else, and everything is changing for them. And that all that does is increase mental turmoil, and it can lead actually to mental illness. So rapidity of social change increases cases of mental illness. Urban congestion. Can you imagine getting stuck at the corner of Farm Avenue and Meadow Lane with one horse and the whole village, you know? Urban congestion. Oh my. You ever been to Boston, New York, Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles? How can you live there? How can you be a human being and live there?
That's right.
It's just incredible. How can you stand? Of course, some people can't. They're trying to get out of those places now. But see, that's the area where everything is produced. That's where the money is, the schooling is, the banking is. That's where life is, we're told. But when you've got a 15-minute commute and it takes you an hour and 15 minutes to do it, I'd buy a helicopter or something. I'd find some way around that. I could not imagine sitting in a car for an hour and 15 minutes to travel 15 miles. And that's why you've got now an increase in tape, cassette players in cars. You've got this huge increase in books being read on tapes and playing these in the cars, because you can get several chapters of a book, quote, read. You can't really read in a car because it's bumper to bumper there, read to you on cassette tape. And there are several companies that are really making it big on that now, reading all the great works of history onto a tape and selling that to people that live in Los Angeles. It takes you so long to get to work, I guess it's worthwhile. It's better than just sitting there, stewing. All that does is make you angry. So you listen to a book or listen to some good classical music or read a newspaper if you can read and drive at the same time. And watch out and make sure nobody pulls a handgun on you when you go by them. Well, we joke about it, but it is so real. It is so real. We just don't have that around here. You know, if you get down to the corner here and you got two cars in front of you, that's congestion. You know, you're backed up. Praise God. Two cars in front of you. It's backed up at the stoplight. Praise God. And you know, in the early days, they didn't have stoplights because people weren't dragsters like they are today. You'd come to an intersection and you knew that you were supposed to look. Today, it's no looking. I hope if you're like me, I look on green. You don't ever know what they're going to do. When it comes to green, I go, but I look both ways. And I think they probably even instruct you in the manuals to do that now. That'd be common sense. The olden days, you wouldn't have to look, but you'd have the sense too if you were supposed to. Today, you have to be told. You're just a robot. Wind up, tell them, should I do it or should I not? What should I do today? You're just wound up like a robot and told, do this, don't do that, watch out for this. And I think you're told, watch out, even on green, someone may be coming, and sure enough, they often do. Suppression of man's individuality. These are some of the personal, spiritual, moral concerns of modern technology. Suppression of man's individuality. Suppression of man's creativity. Things are done by machines, so people aren't that creative anymore. The inventors have to be creative, quote unquote, to get something invented, but that is just one person, and that kills, or at least suppresses, the creativity of the rest of people, because you don't have to think to do anything. Just go buy it. Someone else has already thought for you. Well, look over that list that you just written down. Those are some rather horrifying results of modern technology.
Amen.
If you're really thinking with me, those are rather horrifying. Depersonalization, anonymity, danger and fatalities at work. And I don't mean that there weren't some dangers in old-fashioned forms of work and things, but now Seems like everybody's getting their arm or their leg pulled off on these farm machines, you know. The olden days, you didn't have to worry about that, but some of these modern farm machines are dreadfully dangerous. You get some loose clothing caught in one of those things, and it gobbles you up, you know. Your arm is gone in no time. I've read several accounts of that. The olden days, about the most you had to watch out for is old Henri Nellie kicking you in the head whenever you got behind her or something. And so smart people, just stay away from behind her, approach from the side, love her, give her an apple or something. That's all you had to watch out for. Today, it's not true at all. You got to watch out for everything. Your little grandson might be hyping up the tractor over there and mow you down in the barnyard as you're going to feed the chickens or something. He's been watching dragsters on cartoons on Sunday morning. So he revs the tractor up and mows down his granddad. Fatalities at work, in the automobile, mental illness, urban congestion, and a loss of man's individuality and creativity. The 19th century was really the first time that Western man had a full experience of an exposure to technological advancement. Because it was new, they were practically all awed at and in favor of modern technology. There were only a few dissenters then. There are more today. One early famous dissenter was Emerson, not in favor of modern technology. Emerson had this to say, which I thought was interesting. He said, using still the old agricultural metaphor though, things are in the saddle and ride mankind. Things, Emerson said. I like to give you lots of famous quotes of famous people. It helps you to remember things. Things are in the saddle. T-H-I-N-G-S's. Things are in the saddle and ride mankind. Technology is taken over so that it controls society instead of society controlling technology. Instead of man controlling technology, technology controls man. Man is the beast, the horse. Technology is the man, the guide, the rider. Now let me conclude with 3 examples of modern, 20th century dissenters, not necessarily from a Christian point of view, but 3 that are well known, at least a couple of them are, and that are very interesting. First of all, I would mention the writings of the British writer, science fiction writer, Aldous Huxley. You've all heard of him before, A-L-D-O-U-S. Huxley, H-U-X-L-E-Y. He wrote a book that you can find in a little paperback, which was alluded to in a quote that I gave you earlier, that all of modern technology, what did he say? All our knowledge has not ushered in a brave new world. Obviously that was a reference to this book. Huxley's book, A Brave New World, was published in 1932.
For the continuation of
that all of modern technology, what did he say? All our knowledge has not ushered in a brave new world. Obviously that was a reference to this book. Huxley's book, A Brave New World, was published in 1932. This is specifically one of the classics on anti-technology. It came out during the height of the Great Depression, and it had a view of the future. 1932, now you remember that. That's way before atom bombs and all of this business and television sets, way before television sets. Long time before the atom bomb. That's a long time ago to have some of the views that Huxley did. Huxley, I think, correctly foresaw the future. He saw where modern man and modern technology were going, and he interpreted predictively although Huxley was an atheist, not a Christian, an atheist by his own admission, Huxley interpreted the future quite differently than in the better-known book, 1984, by Orwell. I think that these are the two best-known books that give us kind of a hype prediction of the future. Orwell's 1984, which of course was written in 1948. That's where he got his title. Just swapped the 4 and the 8 to 1984. Orwell's book, I think, is much better known. It came a decade and a half after Huxley's. It came after atom bomb. It came after some of the earlier inventions and workings with the television and so forth. Orwell's interpretation of the future was he saw the future as a state of totalitarianism in its worst form, generally spoken of under the figure of Big Brother. How many of you have read Orwell's 1984? Not as many as I had thought. Well, it's not tremendously significant because I think that he probably has missed. It's been done, many years ago. I think he missed the essence of where future was going. He saw the state of the future, I'm sure all of you have heard of Orwell's 1984, as totalitarianism. Huxley, writing a decade and a half earlier, saw it differently. He saw vast technological improvement so that all man's physical needs and wants that he could possibly have would be completely satisfied and met. But in the process, now you listen to this, this is what he saw in 1932. All of man's physical needs and wants that he possibly could have would be completely satisfied and met. But in the process, he would completely lose his individuality and his meaningfulness as a person. I think Huxley precisely saw what the future held for modern technology. I think Huxley was, in his predictions, much more true to life. His have been more fulfilled than the better-known 1984 of Orwell. How many of you have read A Brave New World? It's a difficult book to read because of all the hype, science fiction terminology and so forth. But if you ever have the time, you don't have anything else to do, as I always say, you ought to pick this up. If you can, and I tell people this, I have to tell my wife this sometimes, you've got to know how to read. You've got to generally get past the first few chapters of a book. Don't ever put a book down on the basis of that. Oftentimes, that's the most boring. Why? It's introductory material. They're getting you off the ground. You got to get going in it. You get going in the book, and if you can try to stay up with the train of thought, it is a little difficult here. By the time you get to the end, with what happens to the last figure and the helicopters all soaring overhead, it is just amazing what he has to say. It has, and you find various references to God and to the Bible and all of this in here, and it will have a profound effect on you. It's like 100, 200 pages in a little paperback, A Brave New World. But I mention Huxley because he was very much an anti-technology person. He wrote in many different areas. He descends, of course, from a very famous British family. Another interesting thing about Aldous Huxley is that he, John F. Kennedy, and C.S. Lewis all died on exactly the same day in November of 1963. I even have a book at home written along the line of a Socratic dialogue between these three men of what the afterlife must be like, from the position of a C.S. Lewis, a J.F. Kennedy, and an Aldous Huxley. They all died on precisely the same day in November in 1963. I've always thought that was interesting. How circumstances arrange themselves thusly is amazing. Huxley and Kennedy and C.S. Lewis died the same day. But A Brave New World, I think, is much better than Orwell's 1984. We have not seen totalitarianism yet, anyway. We have not seen Big Brother yet. We have not seen that at all. We have precisely seen this, that our creaturely habits, desires have been totally met and satisfied. But in the process, we've been stripped of our personality, of our individuality, of our personhood, of meaningfulness to our life. I think that A Brave New World has been precisely fulfilled. That's example number one. Number two, Charlie Chaplin starred in a film entitled The Modern Times. This was, of course, back really in the early years of this century, which depicted the depersonalization of man through the assembly line and mass production. Now that's still true today, but that was really it then, Henry Ford's assembly line. Everyone responsible for just a small cog in the whole production process. That tends to depersonalize an individual. The assembly line and mass production. I've worked in a factory before where I worked on an assembly line. The type of situation we had, management had recognized that to make one person stay at one thing too long was counterproductive to productivity, so you'd get to move around. But there were 16 different lines in this factory, and every time you came to work in the morning, you'd see where your name was posted for that day. Line 1, which was one of the worst, and line 16 was the other worst. Somewhere in between, you just got to sit. Those you really had to work. Or you got to drive a forklift around. That was always the pleasure of the day if you were selected to drive the forklift, which came like once a week per person. That was always a fun day. You just could drive. You didn't have to walk or do anything. Just drive all day long, go back in the back and pick things up and bring them out front and laugh at the guys when they had to unload them. And then they'd laugh at you the next day when you worked on one of the hard lines. But I know what that's like, working on those assembly lines. That's a terrible thing to have to do. Just sit there hour after hour, plugging little things or putting little stickers on, and just over, and it's so monotonizing. It just kills your mind. You just sit there, just like a robot. That's really what happens. If you've never worked there before, you don't know what I'm talking about, but that's really what happens. It turns you just into, a machine. No creativity asked of you at all. Just put the little thing where it goes, or pick it up, or rearrange it, or color it, or put the little stamp on it, and that's all you have to do. So, Charlie Chaplin and his film Modern Times. And then thirdly, and I'll conclude with this third example, the writings of the French writer Jacques Ellul. He's got several interesting books out, The Humiliation of the Word. He's got a lot of things from a Christian perspective out as well. But his masterpiece in 1954 was in French, La Technique. In English, it was published in 1964 as The Technological Society. The Technological Society. Probably the best book that you can read from as a critique of modern technology. Ellul was a lay philosopher, lawyer, and theologian, highly educated and capable. But I say lay. He was not a professional in those areas. He was a writer, but he was extremely knowledgeable in philosophy, in jurisprudence, and theology. And his book, The Technological Society, 1964, is the most sophisticated anti-technology criticism which has been written to date, as far as I'm aware of. And it is a masterpiece. So I can only give you bits and pieces from his book and some of the teachings that I give you these next few Sunday mornings, including this morning on technology. It is a very sophisticated, the most sophisticated critique of modern technology. And his argument, I can sum this up, his argument was that technology now moves society rather than the reverse. That's why I gave you Emerson's quote, "Things are in the saddle and ride mankind." He goes to very elaborate steps in his process of argumentation. It's all documented that technology now moves society. Technology controls man. In other words, technology, as we've said, technology is God now, rather than the reverse, society moving technology or man moving technology. It strips man of his individuality. You're hearing this morning from so many different angles, not just my opinion. Other people have said the same thing. It strips man of his individuality, and it destroys the traditional patterns of any given culture. It destroys them. See, that's what secularization is. It has destroyed the cultural pattern of colonial America that was a pattern that emphasized a belief in the eternal and the supernatural. It strips man of his individuality. It destroys the traditional patterns, whether they're right or wrong. You know, that's another issue. But whatever they are, it destroys the traditional patterns of any given culture. And his conclusion is that it is a curse of modern society.
Thine, O Lord, is the greatness. Thine, O Lord, is the power. Thine, O Lord, is the glory, and the victory, and the majesty. For all that is in the heaven and earth is thine, is thine. Oh, thine is the kingdom, and thou art exalted as head over all. Thine is the kingdom, and thou art exalted as head over all. Thine, O Lord, is the greatness. Thine, O Lord, is the power. Thine, O Lord, is the glory, and the victory, and the majesty. For all that is in the heaven and earth is thine, is thine. Oh, thine is the kingdom, and thou art exalted as head over all. Thine is the kingdom, and thou art exalted as head over all. Thine, O Lord, it is the greatness. Amen. Thine, O Lord, is the power. Thine, O Lord, is the glory, and yes, the victory, and the majesty. For all